Hey guys, it's Mandy. Welcome to my channel. So I filmed a video this summer, a walkthrough of a property after a tenant moved out, and I've kind of been sitting on that video. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to show it to you or not. And the reason for that is number one, just because I'm not very proud of the property. It is kind of run down. I would say that it was our worst property. Yeah, it was our worst property. Recently, another property has taken its place as our worst property when I found out the back half of that property was sinking into the ground. So, yeah, that's my worst property right now. Kind of a sore spot, but um, it'll be okay. Don't worry. We have 15 other properties that are not sinking into the ground, so we'll be okay. But um, this property that I'm making this video about before I got sidetracked, this house we actually did end up selling, so we don't even own it anymore. And then the other reason I didn't want to show you guys the video is just because this property wasn't really a very good investment. My dad bought this property in 1997. It was actually the very first rental property he ever bought, and he paid $22,000 for the house. And even though it was a really cheap house, in the over 20 years that my family owned this house, it really didn't appreciate. We sold it for almost, for just a teeny bit more than my dad paid for it back in 1997. And because it wasn't a very nice house, it didn't rent for very much. I think in the time that we owned this property, we had 3 different tenants in it. The first 2 rented it for somewhere around $285, and then the third tenant, who's the one that recently moved out, he actually lived there for 15 years and he was paying $350 in rent that entire time. My dad didn't increase rent, and when I took over, I also just didn't increase the rent for this particular tenant. The reason being, I just felt bad about the house. I didn't think it was a nice house. The tenant was happy living there, and I did have a conversation with him about doing upgrades, but I would have to increase the rent. And he was happy for the house just to not have any upgrades and stay at $350 a month. The other reason that I really didn't want to do upgrades to the property is because he was a heavy smoker. He had already lived there for 12 years, so the nicotine damage had already been done. Like, it was already coating every pore of that house. But if I were to come in and put new carpet or a new kitchen or a new bathroom or new paint into that house, then that was going to get destroyed by nicotine. And that would be fine, I guess, if he lived there for another 10, 15 years. But if he were to move out in a year or two, which he ended up doing, then any money that I put into that house would kind of be wasted because it would smell like smoke. So I would have to rip it up or to redo it. And you'll see how bad it is from the video. People can smoke in a house, and if they're light smokers, yeah, you can smell it and you can tell. But when they're really heavy smokers and you can just see the nicotine on the wall, that's how this guy was. So that is, I don't think, I mean, I almost feel like you have to rip out the drywall and redo it to get the nicotine out of that house. Okay, so let me show you the property, and just, say whatever you want to say in the comments. I'm happy for you to speak your mind. And if you want to call me out because this house needs an exterior paint job, then feel free. I would understand. Okay, so this is the house. It is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, just a small 850 square foot house. You can see what I mean about it needing an exterior paint job. It's mostly just the concrete cinder block area. So there were a whole bunch of vines growing up the side of the house, and when we pulled them off, it took off some of the paint from the concrete area. And also, I guess the vines were maybe just trapping dirt, and the roots, they stick to the wall. So it really needs pressure washed, and it needs all those roots scraped off and then repainted. But if you look at the rest of the house, like the siding itself, it's in really good condition. There's no rot, and the paint is in pretty good condition on the rest of the house as well. But I will say that pressure washing would go a long way. this side of the house, there's some mold and mildew on the steps and underneath that window unit where it was leaking water. And in this little shed, this is where the fuse box is. So it's still an older fuse box, and that's one of the things that I took into account when we decided to sell the house, is that it did need electrical upgrading. Probably would need to upgrade that to a breaker box and then possibly add some circuits as well. The tenant did leave a little bit of junk. You'll see the back of the house as well. But inside the house, he left it pretty, well, I'm not going to say clean. He could have cleaned a little better, but for having lived there for 15 years, I actually think it looks pretty good. There's no damage, and, well, unless you count the nicotine, but I wasn't there when he moved in, and I don't really know what he and my dad discussed. So I just kind of have to assume that my dad knew he smoked and was okay with him smoking in the house. And in that case, I really can't fault him for the nicotine damage. Now, what I will say is I will not rent to smokers anymore. The only exception to that being if the house already has been smoked in and I cannot get rid of the smell of smoke. Then I feel like the best option there, the most cost-effective option, is just to rent it to another smoker. However, if the house has never been smoked in, I have a very strong no smoking policy. Okay, so this is the dining room, the laundry room, and the kitchen all in one little space here. If you look at the walls, you can see the nicotine, all that yellow and the dripping there. It's just nicotine buildup on the walls. The kitchen still has old pink laminate countertops. The cabinets themselves are not in that bad of condition. I mean, they're solid wood, so you could really clean those up and paint them or stain them, and they would look a lot nicer. The living room is really the worst area. The carpet is just really bad. And then the staining on the wall. Now, if you look at the ceiling, you'll notice it goes from darker to lighter. I'm not exactly sure why that is. I know over in the area where it's darker, that's where they had their desk and they would just sit there and smoke all day. So I don't know if it's nicotine or if it's just discoloration, maybe from the propane unit even. However, the tenant told me that he didn't use the propane unit. He just had those electric infrared portable heaters. And since it's a small house, that's what he used to heat the house. But that discoloration right above the propane unit, it just kind of looks concerning to me. If I were to have kept the house, I definitely would have got that checked out and replaced the propane unit if it needed replaced. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, if there was an issue there or not. Bedroom number 1. And you'll notice some of the windows are replaced in the house and some of them aren't. So some of them are these really old, like original wooden windows, and they're kind of neat. I mean, they are functional, but I think they're probably not very airtight because there did seem to be a little bit of water damage around some of them. That is actually, I know it looks like mildew. It's not. It was just dust. I guess that's where the bed was pushed up, so it's kind of like a spider web with dust in it. The bathroom. So this thing just needs to be basically gutted down to the studs and redone. This paneling needs to come out and put in a new shower surround, a new toilet, new fixtures. It's just old and dated. The water heater closet. Oh, and yeah, I don't know why the paint was peeling so bad on the access to the attic there, but it was. And this is bedroom number 2. So they didn't really use this bedroom very much. And you'll notice the drastic change in the wall color. So the wall in here is very, very white. This is the same color that the living room and the kitchen would have been at one point. The whole house would have been this white color. And these walls are still white because they just use this for storage and they never smoked in here. So by comparison, you could see how much nicotine buildup there really is on the rest of the house. Now that area underneath the window that does kind of look like mildew, that is mildew, that's mold. So I'm not sure if that window was leaking or if it's just because they had this room closed up and there was no heat, no heat and air. So it just kind of got humid and stuffy in there. I'm not sure what would have caused that mildew. And I did not investigate it further or address it since I knew that we were just going to sell the property anyway. The reason that we decided to sell this property instead of keeping it, so we could have kept it and we could have put $15,000 to $20,000 into the property, and then we could have rented it back out for $450 to $500 a month. The reason that we sold the property instead of doing that is for a couple reasons. One, because we already have other vacant properties that we're working on, and this one would be kind of my last priority, and it would be sitting there empty, maybe for even up to a year. So I really just didn't want it sitting there empty for so long. Number two, it's in a horrible location. So actually, we don't even buy properties on this side of the town anymore. Say the town is like a circle, okay? And City Hall's in the middle. Everything to the, it depends on what way you're facing, but everything to this side of City Hall, we don't even buy properties over there anymore. The reason is because the neighborhood's just not good. There's a lot of break-ins. There's drugs. That side of the town has a lot of drugs, whereas the other side of town really doesn't have that same problem. There's a reason I think for that, and it's just because the properties are cheaper on this side. So people who maybe do have drug problems or who kind of don't want to say it, but sex offenders, they can afford to live on that side of town, not so much on the other side of town where the properties are higher. The reason properties are cheaper is because this is where properties were built first over here. So they're older. A lot of them don't have heat and air, and they're mostly smaller properties as well. So yeah, bad location. And then number two is just, I felt like we could put a decent amount of money in it and it still wasn't going to be that nice of a house. It was still going to be in a bad part of town, and it was probably still going to smell like nicotine no matter what we did. Normally I can walk through a house that's been smoked in and I can tell, oh yeah, it smells like cigarette smoke. But I'm not super bothered by it once I get to scrubbing the walls and I'm up close to all that nicotine on the walls. It starts burning my eyes and it does bother me. But this house, just from walking through it, my eyes were burning. I smelled like nicotine for hours after leaving the property. I mean, it was really strong. I wish you guys could experience it, just because you walk in the house and it's just like, and it hits you. And I just felt like I didn't want to be in that house working on it, smelling that smell all day. It really starts to make me feel sick to my stomach. It gives me a headache. I just didn't want to deal with it, and I didn't feel like that property would lend us great tenants. I felt like it was a property where we were setting ourselves up for not so great tenants and for a lot of turnover and possibly even, some headache because of the bad neighborhood. So we decided to sell the property, and we sold it for $26,500, which is $4,500 more than my dad paid for it. So not great. Really, it didn't have any appreciation. Part of that was because it was in worse condition than what my dad bought it, and part of that was because of the neighborhood and the fact that it didn't have central heat and air. I think back in 1997, people didn't care as much if the house had central heat and air, whereas now it really is a must. You can see a very drastic price difference in houses that have central heat and air versus houses that don't. I say this every video, but I would love to know your guys' thoughts on the video. Next video, I'm going to show you a really great investment property that my dad bought. So kind of the opposite of this video. Yeah, I'll see you then. Bye!